We're now moving to the part of the program which will focus on word and silence. And the first thing I'd like to do is to remind you to avoid embarrassment by making sure that your mobile phones are set to silence. This session of word and silence will run until just after 12 o'clock, with 3-minute silences on the hour that we'll all observe. And our thanks are to St. Martin's in the Field clergy for welcoming us into their space to hold this event. And I shall thank more specifically later. But now I won't take up long with introducing our first speaker, who is Dr. David Horan from Trinity College Dublin, where he works in the Trinity Plato Center. He's very modest about his scientific background, but the last 12 years he has brought all that meticulous intelligence to bear on working towards a new translation of the dialogues of Plato. So, David, we are in your hands. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm very honored to be invited to speak here at this event. The question which appears on your program is, why are stillness and silence so important? And I'd like to explore this question in what will ultimately be a practical manner, with an approach which I believe corresponds with the spirit of inquiry which you will find in the works of Plato and in the works of Plotinus, who arrives on the scene some 500 years after Plato. And so I will draw upon what I consider to be their approach, with an approach based on silence, which I will suggest to you does appear with great force and great importance in the works of Plato, and certainly can't be missed in the works of Plotinus. But I'd like to begin just by telling you a very simple story which gives some of the background to what I want to say. The story refers to a religion class which I was in Ireland, and I was aged about 10. Well, we've been taught by a brother who's a member of a religious order, and the brother was talking about the soul. The word soul has been mentioned a number of times this morning, but this brother was talking about the soul. And he told us that he had been in conversation with a surgeon, and this surgeon told him that there is no such thing as soul. The surgeon said, "I have been operating upon bodies all of my life. I'm an experienced and eminent surgeon, and never, ever, as I operated upon those bodies, have I come across soul." Now, the brother was obviously aghast at this, particularly aghast at the fact that such an intelligent, eminent man would doubt one of the fundamental truths of religion. All he said to us was, of course he didn't find the soul is invisible. He then told us that we should pray that we would have faith in these truths of religion and not come to doubt them in the way that the eminent surgeon had come to doubt them. For some reason, that story has stayed with me ever since. For some reason, I found the story exciting, but I'm ultimately not sure why it stayed with me. We had a religious upbringing in which you were not normally introduced to any views which went counter to the truths of our own religion. Here is one case where I was introduced to a doctrine which went counter to the truths of the religion I was being taught. Perhaps that's why it stood in my mind. But I'm not sure That's really why it has stuck in my mind and has stayed with me in that way. I think what excited me as well was that it opened up philosophic inquiry. It opened up exploration of truth. It opened up the possibility that doubt could be replaced with certainty and knowledge. What really attracted me to science was just that. There was doubt, there was confusion. Does the truth lie here? Does the truth lie there? And then suddenly there's a discovery and the doubt is cleared. But the process does not end and we keep moving forward. So I think I was attracted even then to a process of philosophic inquiry or scientific inquiry, whereby one proceeded through investigation, through inquiry, to certainty, where you just knew. I think that may have been why that attracted me, but I'm still standing here now, wondering why that simple story has stayed in my mind for 50 years. It may be clearer by the end of the morning. Now, going back to the story, though, the story of the brother and the surgeon. The surgeon just embodies someone who believes that the physical material world is all there is, and there is nothing beyond the physical material world. Whether that does justice to his views or not does not concern me at the moment. This man believed that the physical material world was all there is. The brother believed in something which was beyond the physical material world and did not depend upon the material world for its existence. He believed in something transcendent. And to this day, there are people who believe that the material physical world is all there is, and there are people who believe there is something beyond it. That was so even in Plato's time. If we go back to Plato and Plotinus, even in Plato's time, there were those who said, all of these Athenians go around talking about gods, but what if there are no gods? Even in the circle around Socrates, there were people who expressed views of that nature, that the physical is ultimate. There may be things like mind, there may even be things like love, but they're just products of the physical and there's nothing beyond the physical. Plato was very, very well aware of this controversy. And Plato writes about it in one particular dialogue in very dramatic terms. There was a myth well known to the Athenians of Plato's time 2,500 years ago, a story that they told of a battle between the gods and the giants for supremacy. The gods did battle with the giants, and this battle of the gods and the giants is depicted again and again and again on Greek art. And on the sculptures on the Parthenon, there are scenes of this battle of gods and giants. Of course, as you would expect, the gods won. They won with the help of a man, Heracles. They needed the help of a human being so that they could win. In the story that every Athenian of Plato's time would have known 2,500 years ago, the gods win and the battle ends. But Plato, in a very famous passage of one of his writings, says, "The battle ever rages. This battle has not ended. This battle between those who believe that the only reality is physical and there is no reality other than the physical on the one side, and those who believe that there is something transcendent, something which is totally independent of the physical and the material and does not depend upon the physical and the material in order to exist. This battle ever rages according to Plato. It goes on and on and on. We can certainly see it most evidently in debates which rage around us today, out there, as we might say. But we also might see it within ourselves. A part of us which really does know that there is something beyond the physical. But sometimes that part of us which knows there is something beyond the physical and knows there's something transcendent can lose the battle to another part of us which thinks, perhaps even for a short time, well, the only reality is the physical. What am I? I'm this. I'm a physical body, and it'll die, and that'll be the end of me. So that battle, which Plato speaks of as going on eternally, I think we can even recognize within ourselves. But the question is, how may this be resolved? If I go back to the brother who educated me just was very grateful that he believed in the immortal soul. And he was very glad that he was not like the surgeon who doubted that there was an immortal soul. Plato and Plotinus certainly find a place for faith. But there's much more in Plato's dialogues and in the writings of Plotinus than a call to have faith. Plato and Plotinus offer us a way in which we can know that there is something beyond the material world, something which entirely transcends the material world, which is not touched in any way by the material world, and which we as human beings can have access to. Those of you who have read Plato, and I'll start with Plato, know that he puts forward philosophical arguments. And those philosophical arguments tackle the very issues I'm discussing now. The question of whether there is something beyond the physical and the material, something which transcends them and is not affected in any way by what happens in this material world, and something which human beings can access. Plato puts forward, let's call them logical philosophical arguments with which we are quite familiar, being familiar with logical philosophical arguments, arguments which show that there is something beyond the physical. Very famously, in the Phaedo, his dialogue, which presents Socrates on the last day of his life, Socrates proves that there is a soul of each person, and that soul is immortal and will continue after the body of the person falls. However, there's an interesting aspect of the human psyche which I think Plato was fully aware of. Somehow or other, we are able to follow logical philosophical arguments. Say yes at every stage of the logical philosophical argument. Say yes at the conclusion of the logical philosophical argument, and still, somehow or other, be left in the same place that we were when it started. It can move us not. So you might try another dialogue. You might read the same dialogue again, thinking you might have missed something. Somehow or other, the words and the structured arguments don't always bring about in our being the very recognition that they're pointing us to, the very recognition which we crave, as was explained by the person who spoke before me. So, is Plato unaware of this? Is this a point he has missed? Well, I'm going to say a definitive no. And I'll just talk again about that dialogue, the Phaedo, the dialogue which captures the last day of Socrates' life. In that dialogue, there are periods of silence. Their duration is unspecified. I sometimes ask people, when it says here there was silence for some time, for how long do you think that silence lasted? Some say, 5 minutes. Some get very excited and say maybe 10. I just ask, how do you know it wasn't 2 hours? They've no answer to that, and neither have I. But why not? Why wasn't it 2 hours? In this same dialogue, the Phaedo, there is one question put to Socrates, which he says is the most difficult and challenging question put at that gathering. Before Socrates answers that question, he falls quiet. It's specifically stated by Plato that before Socrates turns his mind to the great question, the vast question, he falls quiet. Doing what? In this same dialogue, the Phaedo, Socrates explains what philosophy asks of us, what philosophy calls us towards. And when he explains in the Phaedo what philosophy calls us towards, he does not say that it calls us towards wordy, structured arguments. I have the words which he uses here. I've adjusted them slightly so that they represent a call to us. A call by philosophy, as understood by Socrates, a call to us. And I would like to ask us just to follow this guideline, this directions, this call from philosophy just now in silence. And I'll just give you the words. Philosophy persuades you to withdraw from the senses and use them only as much as necessary. Collect and gather yourself into yourself. Trust nothing except your own self and what you can cognize just by yourself about things that are just by themselves. So we come now to the period of silence which was set for 11 o'clock. And I'll just read to you those words once more, and then we just be still and quiet with wherever those words lead us to. Philosophy persuades you to withdraw from the senses. Use them only as much as necessary. Collect and gather yourself into yourself. Trust nothing except your own self. And what you can cognize just by yourself about things that are, just by themselves. So thank you. And I would just conclude by saying that it is a great pity that that aspect of approach to philosophy, through stillness and silence, is missed and overlooked in the writings of Plato. Plotinus, who came 500 years after Plato, did not miss it. And he knew that for true philosophy and for the true search, you must go beyond the words. Thank you.